Hello and welcome to Roni Programs. Today we're going to be looking at a pretty short story for preserving the overworld menu cursor. So the acceptance criteria today are when I open the overworld menu, the cursor should be in the same position as when I closed it. So that seems pretty straightforward. Let's go ahead and begin by writing a test for this feature. So the first thing I wanted to think about was the overworld component renders the overworld menu. And we might think, well, the overworld seems like a good place to store the state for what the cursor will be. Now, the problem with that is that the game renders the overworld based on the current view. And if the view changes to something besides the overworld component is going to unmount and we're going to lose whatever state we've created in here. And I want to avoid using global state for the time being. So I decided that the game is the right component in the hierarchy to manage this state. And the game is not going to have a whole ton of information, but we'll get to that. First, let's write a test. So we can say test, so overworld menu cursor. Cursor is preserved. Something like that. Just keeping it short and simple seems good. So what are we going to do? Well, let's kind of get this test rolling. We're going to render the game component. We're going to start a new game. And then we're going to hit the, what is this? Hit upstart. Oh, I see. Okay. So we're just going to open the start menu. And then we're going to maybe go down, let's say 1, 2, something like that. And we expect, what do we expect to happen? Well, the first question I have is, does the menu have a notion of which menu item is selected? It does. So we have an ARIA selected property. So we can say something like, I expect, what are the menu items that we have item, player name, save. So let's say save because we've gone down 2. So I expect save to be, so selected to be in the document. And then what I expect is that if I hit the start button twice, so, and maybe let's even make this better, maybe B to close, does B close the start menu? I don't even know. B to close the menu and then start to reopen it, I still expect save to be selected. So that's our test. Let's go ahead and save that. Of course, it's going to fail. And let's see why. So it does fail on the last assertion. And it's failing. Sorry, there's a little bit of noise outside. Because the item option is selected. So we can see here, item area selected is true, not the save option. So our test is failing for the right reason. Let's go ahead and implement this thing. So just to kind of sketch out what I want this to look like, imagine I have something like a temporary game data object, and I can, use temporary game data. And note that this is different from the save data, because when we save the game, we're not going to save the cursor position. This is just something that's going to be kind of reset when the game is restarted. So imagining I had something like this, we can first think about what's the temporary game data going to hold. Well, we can create an interface for that, something like temporary. And game is a bit redundant, so maybe we could even just call it like temporary data. Temporary, let's get rid of game. Temporary data. And one of the things this is going to contain is the overworld menu cursor, which is a number. And let's go ahead and make this optional, kind of in the spirit of the rest of art. Actually, let me think about this. So the reason the save data fields are optional is because there might not be anything in local storage, but we can give same defaults to the temporary data. So let's make that a required field. And we don't have a use temporary data hook defined. So why don't we go ahead and create that? And we'll create use temporary data.ts. Temporary data. Something like that. And maybe we can just kind of set temporary data. We can just kind of figure out what this is going to look like. Maybe we can have here, we can have temporary data, set temporary data. This is going to be of type temporary data. Sorry, I'm moving a little bit quickly here, but let's leave that for now. And we're actually not going to return a function set, but maybe something like update temporary data. Just like in our use save data hook, we have an update save data because we're going to want to be able to pass like a partial object back. So something like this, and this is actually going to take the form of an object. Something like that. We'll import this hook. And we don't have an update function defined, so maybe we can define that just to be an empty function, just to get rid of those JavaScript errors. Okay, cool. So we've kind of got the skeleton of things going. Our test still looks like it's failing for the right reason because item is selected. So maybe let's stage what we have for right now. We have an overworld menu cursor. And so the first thing you'll notice actually is that temporary data can be undefined. Let's go ahead and fix that by creating an initial temporary data or something like that. Initial temporary data of type temporary data. And the overworld menu cursor is going to default to 0, let's say. Cool. And when the temporary data is updated, so how did we do this for the use save data? We did something like there's partial and then there's existing. So maybe let's just copy this and repurpose it. So this is not save data anymore. Let's just go ahead and replace save with temporary. And we're using deep merge for that, so we can import deep merge. We actually don't need this default object because it's always going to exist. Partial temporary data is actually going to be of type partial. So that's good. Whereas in the save data, where's the types file? The save data, kind of everything is partial. So let's do that for now. Okay, so now that we kind of have a sense of an overworld menu cursor, let's go back into the game file and we can use that. So imagine I'm here in the overworld and I say, okay, so the overworld menu cursor, world menu cursor, is going to be provided by this temporary data object, and the game is gonna pass it to the overworld, and the overworld is gonna render the menu and all that. So in the overworld, we don't have that prop defined, so maybe we can define that prop and say overworld menu cursor is a number. Something like that. And this brings me to an interesting point. So in the overworld, we're rendering the overworld menu and passing these props down. And we'd have to pass another prop down, overworld menu cursor. And this is just going to pass it down to the subsequent menu that's rendered. So I personally don't think that this overworld menu component is doing a whole lot for us, being isolated like this. So I'm going to say, let's go ahead and bring the menu directly in here, which we can import menu and menu item, something like that. And we have some functions to dismiss the overworld menu, something like that. And then we have this on-save provided to the component as well that we can call. So let's save and make sure all of our tests except the one we expect to fail is passing. So interesting. So closes the overworld menu. Did we make a mistake here? Let's save again, maybe. Okay, so let's try to figure out what's different about this. That's because, yeah, we need to call handle save because we want to dismiss the overworld menu and then call on save. Something like that. Okay, cool. So now just the test we want to fail is failing. We actually don't need this file anymore, so why don't we delete it? And I think we still had an import. We can clean that up as well. And so now what we can do is directly pass the cursor to the menu. Now, this is important to note. The menu you can think about the menu as being an uncontrolled component as it currently stands. So if you're familiar with like the way inputs work in React, you can provide a value or you cannot provide a value, and then the component, depending on which you've decided to do, will take care of the updates for you or allow you to handle the updates. So we want to make menu a controlled component in that way. So if I provide a cursor, for example, then it's going to use that cursor value. Otherwise, it's going to use its own its own state, let's say. And that might change a little bit how the menu works. So we'll have to see about that. So the most important thing though is that conceptually we're passing the overworld menu cursor to the menu. And then the other thing we want to do is the menu now has to tell us when the cursor has changed so we can handle that update ourselves. And we could say something like handle cursor change. Maybe we can even say like handle overworld menu cursor change, just in case the overworld renders different menus. Something like that. We can create a method for this. Once again, you can kind of see the level of responsibility that the overworld is growing. That's important to note, so we can think about how we might refactor later on. But all this is going to do is just call. Actually, yeah. Now that I'm thinking about it, let's instead just have an on overworld menu cursor change, something like that, and then we can just take that in and pass it to the on cursor change, something like that. Now this means that the game is going to have to provide the overworld with that functionality. So we can have an handle overworld menu cursor change. It's going to take the cursor value and it's going to update temporary data overworld menu cursor to be the new cursor value, and we can even just say overworld menu cursor, something like that, and pass this down as a prop. So hopefully everything I'm doing here is pretty straightforward and makes sense. Just to make that explicitly clear. Like I said, hopefully this is pretty straightforward stuff. Great. So now we need to think about how we're going to make the menu a controlled component. So the first thing is that we're going to want to take a cursor property, prop, and it's going to be optional because we may or may not be provided a cursor. Yes. So The other thing we may or may not be provided is on cursor change. Takes a cursor and returns nothing. And so now we can take in these new props and figure out what the heck we're going to do with them on cursor change. Cool. Just make sure. Cool. Just the same test as sailing. Okay. So right now, all of the work to let me think about how I want to say this. So all of the work to handle the cursor's position is done by this use cursor function. And we can see that we have this kind of API that wraps some of the internal behavior, like the cursor's position. So we can just say, is it at this position, rather than getting the exact position of the cursor, which was a design decision we made. But now we want to be able to control the value of the cursor that we're using. And so I'm trying to think about what would be the most elegant way to do this. So my first thought is use cursor could take new parameters, cursor and on cursor change, in addition to the children. And if those values are present, like if there's a cursor provided, let's say, then it's going to, it's interesting. It's almost like we want, like I'm just thinking, it's almost like we want a menu that we can control and a menu that we don't have to, or are allowing the game to control for us. And I'm thinking now that if use cursor was to take the extra parameters, let's play around with that idea. So let's say that use cursor can take and this is, we're only doing this because, or sorry, let me back up. We are going to we're just going to play around with this idea, and its success or failure will kind of give us a sense of if there are improvements we can make, or if this is a flexible design. So maybe the first thing we can do is maybe we could make this like an options field, something like use cursor options, maybe something like that. Let's define what that interface looks like. Use cursor options. And we can be provided a cursor, let's say, on cursor change. And this is going to be an optional parameter, which can take the default value of an empty array. Oh, I guess if we do, wait. Okay, can't have a question mark and an initializer. So this is how we tell it it's optional. So let's provide use cursor with the options, something like that. And I think the first thing we need to do is check if this is controlled input, or no, is controlled cursor, I guess. So basically what we're just checking for here is we're saying if a cursor value has been provided, then the calling component is responsible for handling updates to the cursor. And I'm going to use the value of the cursor rather than this internal cursor value that I've got here. So everywhere we're using cursor, we need to think about everywhere we're reading and writing cursor, we need to think about whether or not it's a controlled input. And so the first thing I want to do is address this isCursor@position function. And so ideally what we would do, and I'm debating whether we should, let's do it. Let's write tests for the menu using controlled. Yeah, I think I like that idea. Okay. So let's wrap all this right here in a, we can actually maybe reuse the onFoo select, but let's wrap this in a describe block. And this can be a uncontrolled menu. Something like that. Or maybe we could do menu uncontrolled cursor, something like that. Cool, no new failures. And we can differentiate this from a menu with a controlled cursor. And so here, we want to create like a menu wrapper component that's going to render the menu with the controlled values, because we can't call hooks in here and provide values to the render method. So here maybe we could do something like cursor set cursor equals use state, something like that. Set it to 0 by default maybe. And then we can return a menu, and we can even say menu with controlled cursor, something like that. Just render menu with controlled cursor. We can reuse the onFoo select on bar select. We will want to have, I actually don't think that's, I think it's fine. Sorry, there was one more thing that I think we needed to provide. Oh yeah, so this is going to take the cursor, and on, oh yeah, so I think we don't necessarily need, I'm going back and forth on it. I'm not sure what the right way to test this is. I think a better way would be to render the menus per test and see what we can consolidate. So let's remove this before each. Let's figure out what test we want to write first. So maybe the first test we can write is calls on cursor change when the up button is pressed. Calls on cursor change with the next cursor, something like, or with the previous cursor, something like that. So here we're going to render a menu. The first cursor value is going to be 1, and on cursor change, we can have a callback here, cursor change, And we don't necessarily need to provide it globally like this here. Maybe we can just pull this into here, something like that. And actually, I'm sorry, let me, before we get a whole bunch of junk, let me comment that out. Man, I really thought this was going to be a much shorter episode, but it's okay. Sometimes this happens. So we expect, what do we expect? We expect that when the up button is pressed, no, we need to write a test before this, which is selects the option corresponding to the cursor, something like that. And the way that we can test that is to render a menu with cursor position 1, something like that. Let's even provide 3 menu items here. Something like that. So yeah, this is the first test. Does it select the option corresponding to the cursor? And we can see here it's selecting the first menu item, but we said the cursor position was 1. So this is our first test. Let's go ahead and implement that. So is cursor at position? What we're going to do is say if the cursor is controlled, then we're going to return options.cursor is equal to the index. Yeah, sorry, it took me a second to like figure out what we were going to do there. Okay, so it looks like that test is passing. The next thing we want to do is test that it calls on cursor change with the previous cursor when the up button is pressed. So now it's becoming clear to me that we can wrap this in a before each, something like that. We don't need to render this anymore. And what do we expect here? We expect the on cursor change to have been called with the value 0 when the up button is pressed, and we expect it to have been called 1 time when the up button is pressed. So controller button key up. So in other words, the up button is pressed, and on cursor change needs to be fired with the value 0 because it was 1. It's going up, so then the next cursor should be 0. So that test is failing. Let's make it pass. Move cursor up. We can say if the cursor is controlled, then we're going to call options.onCursorChange, if it's provided, with the value cursor minus 1, something like that. Return. Now, I'm not 100% sure if like we can run into issues with stale closures. So I'll have to think about that. But we can fix that problem if we run into it. And it's not the cursor, it's the options.cursor. I would like it if it knew that when the cursor was controlled, options.cursor was not undefined. It doesn't know that. Can we make a type guard for this? Is controlled cursor. So let's say it's a cursor, and that can be a number or undefined, and we can say cursor is number if return cursor is not equal to undefined. So maybe we could do something like that. So is controlled cursor options dot cursor. Let's see what that does. Ah, we've got a variable and type guard being the same thing. What is this return value, by the way? Controlled cursor. Is this would just be a, oh, it is a Boolean. Okay. So, what do we call this thing to make it different? Could we just say is controlled? Maybe we can just call it is controlled. So it still doesn't know that. Oh, it's because, oh, I see. Ah, this is a pain. This is a pain indeed. I don't like that. Let me undo that. Okay, we'll come back to maybe wrapping this in a Boolean, but let's just keep this at the type level. So something like this. It's a pain that I'm sure there is a way to do it, but let's do this for now. So actually that test, we did get the up cursor test to pass, which is what we were looking for. Next we can maybe do the same with the down button. And so that's when the with the next cursor position. So we're going to expect that to have been called with 2. And we've got a failing test. Let's go ahead and implement that now. Just give me one moment. So yep, we've got our failing test. Here, basically, if the cursor is provided, we want to call on cursor change with the next cursor position. So we're actually, there is a little bit of a mismatch here. So here we're doing a check to make sure the value never goes below 0. Here we're making sure it never goes above the children count. So first let's save this. We could write a test to, oh, what happened here? Press the next cursor when the down button is pressed. And it's getting called with 0. Oh, because our test is still hitting the up button. Okay, cool. So now, yeah, that's interesting. So I think it's related to the problem we just described. And so what we need to do is guard against the values going down past 0 or past the accepted count. I think that's the problem with this test over here. So let me think about this now. So we've got, maybe we could just have, man, this video is getting long and I don't have a super elegant way to handle this right now. in mind at least. Maybe we could just have a little function, get next cursor position returns number C, and we can return this value, and then we can say, we can actually probably just provide the get next cursor position, something like that. And then we can do the same thing here. Maybe this can be get previous cursor position. That's going to return this value. We can set the cursor to the previous cursor position and then wrap the options.cursor in that call as well. So why is this test failing? So it can't find an accessible element with role option and the name continue. And that's in the game test. Let me just take a peek in here and see why that might be. Oh, I think I know why. I think it's because of the select. So let's see if fixing that. So we have scroll up and down, and then selects the option at the cursor position when the A button is pressed. So when we hit the A button, we expect on bar select to have been called once, and we also expect on foo and on baz not to be called, something like that. So this is going to fail, and then let's just go ahead and implement that. So the selected menu item, we can say maybe something like, let's wrap this in a function, get selected menu item, takes a cursor position, and it's going to return rect.children of the cursor position, something like that. And then we can say selected menu item, we can say options dot, wait, sorry, let me think about this. Yeah, okay, I think this is fine. If the cursor is defined, we can do get selected menu item at that cursor position, options.cursor. Otherwise, in fact, let's just wrap this here. Sorry, I'm going back on a couple ideas here. Let's get selected cursor. Just say get cursor. I don't know. Because this video is running long, this is turning into like, let's get this thing working quickly. And we can always come back and clean up. So we can say return options.cursor, otherwise return the cursor. Something like that. This is not turning into the cleanest code. Okay, yeah, so that was the issue. So we've got all our tests passing. That's wonderful. Now, it's interesting because in writing the test for the menu, for the controlled menu, we actually fulfilled the game test. So we're done. And I say that the last thing to do is check that it works in the game itself. So let's go ahead and, whoops, I was going to say, do we have a bug? We might have a bug there. I'm not sure what just happened. I think it was because like it has something to do with like React trying to hot load. It looks like it's fine, but let's go ahead and start a new game. We'll select red. Doesn't really matter. So we'll open the menu. I'm going to hit the exit and then I'm going to open it again. Sure enough, we're at exit. Let's hit save. Open it again. We're at save. So that is a feature working. Oops, let's go ahead and to make this video just a little bit longer, make that green. There's one last thing I want to do in this video. I noticed in this test file, we don't have an update save data callback anymore for the overworld component. I think it's called on save. Oh no, wait. Update save data. What are we what are we missing? Is it on player direct? It might be on player direction change. Which we're not actually doing anything with those. Yeah, it's it is frustrating when like we've got a test here that doesn't really like check those values, so we can have type errors creep in over time. But let's go ahead and fix these up. And the last thing it needs is an on overworld menu cursor change. As if this video wasn't long enough. Let's order these like that. What's the problem here? Oh, and we need an overworld menu cursor. Yeah, so fun. Actually, we want to. Interesting. Interesting. For our test assumes that this is a. Oh man, that's that's such a pain. Well, simple fix is just to say the overworld cursor menu is optional, and not provide it in our test, something like that. I'm not sure what the right way to handle situations like that are, because we've already got this tested through the game test. So I'm not sure, like we don't need to render a component that handles the cursor position, and like that tells me that this is maybe not the right place for this test, or something is not quite right about what we're doing in this test file. So maybe something like selecting the menu item. Maybe that's not the responsibility of this file. So we'll come to that another day. Let's celebrate our new feature, a 2-pointer that took, what, an hour? Which would not be bad for maybe like a real world problem, but usually the 2-pointers I try to keep really short. So this is feature, preserve overworld menu cursor. We can call this done. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.